Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Appalachian Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The autumn of 1914 brought an unusual chill to McDowell County, West Virginia. Those familiar with the unforgiving nature of the Appalachian Mountains knew better than to dismiss the early frost as mere coincidence. Old-timers claimed the mountains had ways of warning those willing to listen. The small settlement of Welch, nestled between imposing ridges, was home to approximately 800 souls, most employed by the burgeoning coal industry that had transformed these ancient hills into industrial veins of commerce. According to county records dated November 1914, the local sheriff's office received 17 separate complaints regarding unusual smoke and peculiar odors emanating from a remote homestead approximately 4 miles north of town, along what is now known as Beartown Road. The property belonged to the Blackburn sisters, Minerva and Cordelia, who had inherited the isolated 120-acre plot after the passing of their father, Jeremiah Blackburn, in 1908. Locals rarely encountered the sisters in town, though on occasion they would appear at Harmon's General Store to purchase supplies not cultivable on their land. What made the Blackburn sisters objects of curiosity and whispered speculation was their steadfast commitment to hosting Sunday gatherings. Every week, without fail, smoke would rise from their chimney, and the sounds of multiple horses and carriages could be heard approaching the isolated homestead. According to statements provided by Zachariah Morton, whose property bordered the eastern edge of the Blackburn land, these gatherings began precisely 3 months after their father's passing and continued uninterrupted for 6 years. The county tax assessor's ledger from 1910 describes the Blackburn property as containing a substantial 2-story dwelling of timber construction with stone foundation, 1 barn suitable for livestock, root cellar, and smokehouse. What the official record fails to mention is the unusual layout of the main house, which according to hand-drawn plans discovered in 1963 during a survey for potential mining operations, featured an unusually large kitchen and dining area that occupied nearly the entire ground floor. The second floor contained only 3 small bedrooms and what appeared to be a study. The architectural anomalies didn't end there. The kitchen contained 3 separate hearths, unusual for even the largest homes of the period, and the basement featured stone channels that several engineers later suggested were designed for drainage of significant quantities of fluid. On December 3, 1914, Dr. Wellington Hargrove was summoned to the Blackburn property, an unusual occurrence as the sisters were not known to seek medical attention. The doctor's journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1926 and currently preserved in the McDowell County Historical Society archives, contains a curious entry about this visit. Called to attend to Cordelia Blackburn, aged approximately 42, presenting with severe laceration to right forearm. Patient claimed injury resulted from preparation of Sunday feast. Wound inconsistent with typical kitchen accident, jagged deep to fascia. Patient refused stitches, accepted only cleaning and bandaging. Observed unusual odor throughout dwelling. Sister Minerva exceptionally protective. Limited examination. Kitchen doors closed despite cooking aromas. Declined invitation to stay for meal. Noted several carriages approaching as I departed. Minerva insisted I use rear path to avoid disturbing the gathering. Observed what appeared to be a reinforced door with unusual locking mechanism leading to basement. Dr. Hargrove made a subsequent entry dated December 5th. Troubled by Blackburn visit, smell lingering in my clothing required burning of coat. Reminiscent of anatomy laboratory from medical school, yet with undertones of spice and smoke. recalled old professor's warning about hunger that transcends conventional morality. Consider reporting to Sheriff Hammond, though without evidence, merely suspicion based on medical training. The doctor's visit might have remained an isolated incident, were it not for what transpired 3 weeks later. On December 27, 1914, a severe snowstorm descended upon McDowell County. According to weather records maintained by the coal company, approximately 26 inches of snow fell in under 18 hours, effectively isolating many of the outlying properties from town. Among those caught by the storm were Percival and Adelaide Rothwell, traveling by carriage from Charleston after visiting relatives for Christmas. When they failed to arrive at their home in Bluefield, concern mounted. The Welch Sentinel newspaper from January 4, 1915 reports, travelers missing in storm Mr. Percival Rothwell, 39, and wife Adelaide, 37, remain unaccounted for following the Christmas blizzard. The couple was last seen departing from relatives in Charleston on the afternoon of December 26th. Sheriff Hammond organized a search party, but found no trace of the couple nor their carriage along the main road. Anyone with information is encouraged to contact the sheriff's office immediately. What the newspaper fails to mention is that Sheriff Hammond's search party did find something, though not on the main road. According to his private logbook, located in 1957 when the sheriff's office was relocated, the search party discovered fresh carriage tracks turning onto the private access road leading to the Blackburn property. The logbook entry reads, "Tracks indicate recent travel, despite storm. Proceeded to Blackburn residence. Sisters claimed no visitors since before Christmas. Denied permission to search property without warrant. Observed fresh horse droppings in barn, still warm despite freezing temperatures. Sisters explained they had brought livestock inside due to cold. Blackburn women hostile to further questioning. Younger sister, Cordelia, appeared nervous, hand trembling. Older sister, Minerva, did all speaking. Unusual smell throughout property. Request for meal from their kitchen, firmly rejected." The next entry, dated January 5, 1915, provides further insight. Deputy Simmons returned to Blackburn property with warrant after discovery of personal effects matching Rothwell description approximately half-mile from property boundary. Search of main house revealed nothing conclusive. Sisters explained they had burned excess food prepared for Sunday gathering that never occurred due to storm. Animal bones and kitchen fireplace consistent with explanation. Request to search outbuildings denied by Magistrate Holloway on technical grounds. Warrant specified dwelling only. Minerva Blackburn presented letter from Sylvanus Crawford, Eskerner's attorney from Charleston, advising no further cooperation without legal counsel present. Investigation suspended pending further evidence. The sheriff's suspicions were apparently not strong enough to warrant further action, as no follow-up entries appear in his logbook. The Rothwells were never found, and by February 1915, the newspaper had ceased mentioning the disappearance. A ledger from Harmon's General Store, preserved by the proprietor's descendants and donated to the County Historical Society in 1952, contains an unusual entry dated January 7, 1915. Blackburn sisters purchased 50 lbs salt, 20 lbs sugar, 5 lbs black pepper, unusual quantity dried herbs, special order from Charleston, 3 new cleavers, 2 bone saws, additional butcher's supplies. Minerva mentioned planning for largest gathering yet on coming Sunday. Requested delivery. Declined due to road conditions. Carried supplies themselves via sled. Noted Cordelia examining medical supplies, but purchasing none. Perhaps the most disturbing account comes from Josephine Cartwright, who in 1962, at the age of 93, provided a recorded oral history to the West Virginia Folklore Commission. As a young woman of 45 in 1914, she claimed to have attended one of the Blackburn sisters' Sunday gatherings in late October of that year. Her testimony, transcribed and stored in the state archives, contains the following passage. They didn't invite just anyone, you see. You had to be selected. I'd been widowed that spring when my Thaddeus was crushed in a cave-in at the Ekman mine. I was alone, with no family nearby. Minerva approached me after church one Sunday, though I note neither she nor her sister ever stayed for the service, just lingered outside afterward. She said they were hosting a special gathering for those who'd suffered loss, said there was comfort in communion with others who understood grief. I was desperate for any solace, so I accepted. There were 8 of us invited that day. We arrived separately, around 4 in the afternoon as the day was growing dim. The house was larger than I expected, set back against the hillside so you couldn't see the rear portion from the approach. Inside smelled of herbs, pungent ones I couldn't name, and something rich cooking. We gathered in the parlor first, where Minerva led what she called a remembrance circle. We each spoke of our departed loved ones. She had us bring small tokens. I brought Thaddeus's pocket watch. These were placed in a wooden bowl in the center. The bowl had carvings I didn't recognize, not Christian symbols, something older. Minerva chanted something in a language I didn't understand, while Cordelia sprinkled the contents with a liquid from a small blue bottle. When time came for the meal, Cordelia emerged from the kitchen. I recall finding it odd I'd heard no sounds of cooking, despite the elaborate spread presented. The dining table was massive, dark wood scarred with countless knife marks. The feast was unusual. I cannot describe the meats presented. They resembled no cut of beef or pork or game I'd encountered in my decades of cooking. The sisters explained they raised their own livestock, special breeds not common to the region. Everything had an overpowering flavor, heavily spiced, as if to mask something. The meat had a peculiar texture, tender yet somehow resistant to the tooth in a way I'd never experienced. I remember distinctly that all the dishes contained meat in some form. Even what appeared to be sweet puddings had a mysterious substance folded into them. What disturbed me most was the sisters' behavior during the meal. They ate nothing themselves, but watched us with an intensity that grew uncomfortable. Minerva would ask strange questions. Do you feel it yet? The connection to your departed? And is the essence familiar? Halfway through the meal I began to feel strange, lightheaded, yet intensely aware. The others reported similar sensations. Harrison Montgomery, who'd lost his wife to pneumonia, suddenly began weeping, claiming he could hear his wife's voice coming from the empty chair beside him. Agatha Pendleton said she felt her late husband's presence so strongly she could smell his tobacco. I thought I heard Thaddeus whispering, though I couldn't make out the words. I left before dessert was served, claiming a headache. As Cordelia showed me out, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a bandage spotted with fresh blood. She saw me notice and quickly covered it, saying only, "The preparation requires sacrifice. The essence transfer demands a blood token from the preparer." I didn't understand her meaning then. I wish I still didn't. I never returned and discouraged anyone from accepting their invitations thereafter. By Christmas, I heard they'd stopped extending them to individuals, instead hosting larger gatherings of people unknown in town. Mrs. Cartwright's testimony continues with a disturbing postscript. 3 weeks after attending their dinner, I began experiencing vivid dreams of Thaddeus, not ordinary grief dreams. These were different. He would appear at the foot of my bed, speaking in a voice that seemed to come from within my own body rather than from his apparition. He would say, "I am part of you now. You've taken me in." The dreams persisted for months. Even now, all these decades later, I sometimes feel him inside, watching through my eyes. After I attended that dinner, something changed in me. I found myself standing at my kitchen counter, knife in hand, wondering what it would be like to prepare a special meal for my grieving neighbor. I threw the knife away and prayed until the thought passed. But the urge returns, particularly on Sundays. The coal company records indicate a geological survey was conducted in the area surrounding the Blackburn property in January 1915. The survey notes, written by geologist Hammond Pierce, make reference to unusual soil composition in a clearing approximately 300 yards behind the main house, an area not visible from the approach road. The surveyor wrote, "Ground appears to have been disturbed repeatedly. Soil samples show unusually high organic content and mineral composition inconsistent with surrounding terrain. Recommend avoiding area for shaft placement due to unknown subsurface conditions. Noted unusual drainage system extending from direction of main dwelling toward this clearing. System appears deliberately constructed. Stone-lined channels approximately 8 inches in depth covered with removable wooden slats. Purpose unclear. Though consistent with slaughterhouse drainage designs I observed in Chicago stockyards. Unusual arrangement of stones in circular pattern at center of clearing. Rocks positioned vertically, reminiscent of primitive calendar or ceremonial configuration. Several trees surrounding clearing exhibit unusual markings, not natural growth patterns or animal damage. Symbols carved into bark approximately 6 to 7 feet above ground level, not recognizable as any standard survey markings or logging designations. Collected bark samples with markings for further examination." A follow-up note in the margin, dated February 2, 1915, states simply, "Samples missing from storage. Survey equipment damaged in office break-in. No further investigation authorized by management. Area designated as unsuitable for development without explanation in official report." On February 17, 1915, the Blackburn property was found abandoned. According to Sheriff Hammond's report, filed February 19th, he was alerted by Zachariah Morton, who noticed no smoke from the chimney despite the continuing winter cold. Upon investigation, Hammond found the house unlocked but entirely vacant of inhabitants. The report states, "No sign of struggle or forced entry. Food remains in pantry. Personal effects, including clothing, appear to be missing. Unusual collection of knives and tools found in kitchen, not consistent with standard culinary use. Large salt-lined wooden containers in root cellar, empty but stained. No indication of destination or reason for sudden departure. Document found on dining table. Appears to be list of names, some marked with symbols. Names include several residents of county known to have lost family members in past year. Other names unfamiliar, possibly from surrounding counties. Final page contains phrase in unknown language, followed by English text. The hunger grows as essence dilutes. New ground required. Significance unclear. An addendum to the report marked not for public record and signed by both Sheriff Hammond and Dr. Wellington Hargrove contains the following: basement examination revealed evidence inconsistent with normal household use. Floor sloped toward central drain. Walls showed signs of regular washing. Water staining consistent with frequent cleaning. Iron rings embedded in stone walls at intervals. Wooden table with restraint apparatus. Collection of implements including bone saws, various knives and tools associated with butchery rather than medical practice. Dr. Hargrove identifies blood residue in drain and on table surface, despite evidence of thorough cleaning. Volume suggests multiple sources. Recommendation: seal premises. Limit knowledge of findings to prevent public disturbance. The most troubling discovery came in the spring thaw. On April 3, 1915, Zachariah Morton's dog returned to his property carrying what was initially thought to be an animal bone. Upon closer examination, Morton realized it was a human finger bone with traces of flesh still attached. He immediately contacted the sheriff. The subsequent investigation, documented in files that were later sealed by court order until 1955, revealed a clearing behind the Blackburn house that contained numerous human remains. According to the coroner's report, Excavation of site yielded partial remains of what appear to be no fewer than 11 individuals. Condition suggests processing consistent with butchering techniques, evidence of cutting, separation of joints, and removal of flesh from bone. Many remains show signs of exposure to heat and cooking. Most appear recent, though some remains may date back several years based on decomposition. Positive identification impossible for most remains due to condition. One set of remains tentatively identified as Percival Rothwell, based on dental work consistent with description provided by Charleston dentist. Gold pocket watch chain entangled in ribcage fragments matches description of item Rothwell was known to carry. Additional remains include portions of what appears to be a female, possibly Mrs. Rothwell, though insufficient evidence for positive identification. Remaining 9 individuals include both male and female, ages ranging from approximately 20 to 65 years based on bone structure and dental condition. No complete skeletons present, suggests a deliberate disassembly and dispersal of remains. A subsequent page, heavily damaged by water staining but partially legible, continues. Most disturbing aspect of remains is evidence of selective, illegible section, particularly organs associated with. Illegible section. Brain tissue, heart, liver, and certain glands appear to have been removed with illegible section. Precision suggesting knowledge of human anatomy beyond typical, illegible section. Residue of herbs and spices embedded in remaining tissue. Illegible section. Consistent with culinary preparation rather than illegible section. The Blackburn sisters were never found. A regional alert was distributed throughout West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee, but no confirmed sightings were ever reported. Speculation in the community ranged widely. Some believed they fled after their activities were discovered, while others suggested they themselves might have become victims of whatever sinister force had been at work on their property. In 1926, a woman matching Minerva Blackburn's description was reported working as a cook at a mining camp in Harlan County, Kentucky. By the time authorities investigated, she had departed, leaving behind only a handwritten recipe book that was burned by the camp manager after several miners became violently ill following a Sunday dinner. The camp physician's report, filed with the mining company, but never forwarded to authorities, noted that the miners exhibited symptoms consistent with consumption of toxic substances. It also reported unusual shared hallucinations of deceased family members. Perhaps the most unsettling postscript to this account comes from a journal discovered in 1942 during the demolition of a condemned boarding house in Bristol, Tennessee. The journal, believed to belong to Cordelia Blackburn based on handwriting comparison with county tax documents, contained the following passage. The nourishment must continue. Emser believes the essence transfers through consumption. Each Sunday we prepare the feast with careful attention to the ritual. Those who dine with us unknowingly forge the connection between realms. They leave carrying pieces of the departed within them, ensuring those we've processed are never truly gone. Father taught us the old ways before his passing. He said our ancestors in the old country were revered for their ability to keep families together even after death. The authorities would not understand. We provide a service. Those who join our table are bringing their lost loved ones back into this world, one meal at a time. We must move again soon. M has found a suitable location further south, where questions are fewer and traditions of the old ways still linger in isolated communities. The hunger never ceases. A later entry, dated January 1915, reads, "The Rothwells provided exceptional essence. M says their grief over their brother's death 3 months prior made them ideal vessels, the connection already established through emotional bonds. Their preparation yielded enough for 3 separate feasts. Yesterday's gathering was our largest yet, 12 mourners consuming essence without knowledge. The results were remarkable. Augusta Palmer claimed to feel her husband's spirit enter her during the meal. Ezekiel Thompson wept as he described his wife speaking to him from inside his mind. The transfer is becoming more efficient as we refine the ritual. M has identified a new preparation technique involving lunar cycles and specific herb combinations. The next feast will be even more powerful. The final entry, dated February 15, 1915, states only, "We are discovered, deputy observed the clearing. We depart tonight for the Tennessee location. The hunger travels with us. The work continues. The dead must be remembered through more than words and stones." The journal was transferred to the Tennessee State Police, but disappeared from evidence storage in 1944. Its current whereabouts remain unknown. In 1957, anthropologist Dr. Harriet Livingston from the University of Virginia conducted research into Appalachian folk traditions and possible connections to European practices brought by early settlers. Her unpublished manuscript, Consumption Rituals and Transubstantiation Beliefs in Isolated Mountain Communities, likely draws parallels between the Blackburn case and obscure practices documented in remote alpine villages in the 17th century. She writes, "The belief that consuming specially prepared flesh creates a bridge between the living and the dead appears in various forms across multiple cultures. What distinguishes the Appalachian variant is the ritualistic component of communal consumption, the sharing of the feast among those grieving. The preparer of such feasts was traditionally a woman who had herself experienced significant loss, thus becoming a conduit for the transition. The Blackburn sisters' activities, while horrific by modern standards, align with these historical practices. The invitation of bereaved individuals, the use of personal tokens in the preparation, and the specific timing of the gatherings, Sunday, traditionally associated with resurrection in Christian contexts, all suggest adherence to a formalized ritual structure rather than mere homicidal impulses. The sisters appear to have genuinely believed they were providing a spiritual service, allowing the bereaved to literally incorporate the essence of their departed loved ones. Historical records from certain isolated alpine communities describe similar practices, particularly in regions where harsh winters and geographical isolation limited regular contact with established religious authorities. In these communities, appointed memory keepers, invariably women who had lost spouses or parents, would prepare ritual meals for the grieving. While documentary evidence is deliberately vague regarding the precise nature of these meals, ecclesiastical courts from the period contain multiple references to unholy consumption and flesh feasts in their condemnation of these practices. What makes the Blackburn case particularly significant is the apparent effectiveness of their rituals, at least in the minds of participants. Multiple accounts from those who consumed the sisters' feasts describe sensations of direct communication with the deceased, not as external presences, but as voices and sensations emanating from within their own bodies. This aligns with the core belief underlying these traditions, that through ritual consumption, the essence of the dead could be preserved within the living, creating a literal incorporation rather than mere remembrance. Dr. Livingston's research was discontinued after her academic funding was suddenly withdrawn. According to university records, she resigned her position in 1958 and relocated to an undisclosed location. Her manuscript remains in the university archives, uncatalogued and accessible only by special permission. A former colleague, Dr. Samuel Blackwood, provided a statement to the West Virginia Historical Society in 1965 regarding Dr. Livingston's departure. Harriet became increasingly paranoid during her research into the Blackburn case. She claimed to be receiving invitations to Sunday dinners left on her doorstep, though none were ever found. In our last conversation, she mentioned discovering a family connection to the Appalachian region. Supposedly, her maternal grandmother came from a community near the West Virginia-Kentucky border. She became convinced that her research wasn't academic curiosity, but blood calling to blood, as she put it. The last thing she told me was that she was experiencing vivid dreams of her deceased father speaking to her from inside. She disappeared the following week. I've often wondered if she found what she was looking for, or if it found her. In 1963, during the coal company's expansion of mining operations in McDowell County, workers clearing land near the former Blackburn property discovered a cave entrance that had been sealed with stones. Breaking through the barrier, they found a small natural chamber containing preserved food supplies, women's clothing, and a collection of journals. According to the site foreman's report, before proper documentation could take place, an unexplained fire broke out in the temporary office where the items were being stored. Nothing was salvaged from the blaze. However, one of the workers, Silas Webb, later claimed to have read portions of the journals before the fire. In a local newspaper interview from 1964, Webb stated there was one book that had recipes in it, but not like any cookbook you've ever seen. Each recipe had a name at the top, a person's name, and specific instructions about how to prepare different parts. The worst thing was at the end of each recipe was a list of what they called suitable recipients, people who would benefit from consuming that particular dish. They had it all worked out, like a science. One passage said something like, "The essence of grief resides primarily in the heart tissue, while memory concentrates in the brainstem and certain glands." It talked about how different preparations were needed, depending on what aspect of the deceased they wanted to preserve and transfer. Webb's account was largely dismissed as sensationalism, and the newspaper printed a retraction in the following issue. Webb himself refused to speak further on the matter, and according to local records, relocated to Ohio shortly afterward. Local historian Vernon Hatfield, in his 1968 book, Forgotten Crimes of the Coal Counties, suggests the Blackburn sisters were practitioners of a belief system brought to the Appalachian region by immigrants from isolated regions of Central Europe in the mid-19th century. He posits that Jeremiah Blackburn, the sisters' father, may have been a second-generation adherent to these practices, based on immigration records showing his father arrived from an unspecified Austrian province in 1848. Hatfield writes, "The mountains have always harbored secrets. Isolated communities develop their own moral frameworks, particularly when traditional religious institutions are absent or inconsistent. The Blackburns appear to have operated within a belief system that viewed the preparation and serving of human flesh as a sacred act, one that provided spiritual comfort to the bereaved by literally incorporating the essence of their departed loved ones. The careful selection of guests, all having recently lost family members, suggests these were not random acts of violence, but rather a twisted form of perceived community service. The practice likely originated in pre-Christian traditions where consumption of the dead was seen not as desecration, but as the highest form of respect, a way to keep the departed literally within the community. As Christianity spread throughout Europe, such practices were driven underground, persisting only in the most isolated regions. When immigrants from these areas arrived in America, they found the isolated hollows and remote ridges of Appalachia perfectly suited to maintaining traditions that mainstream society would find abhorrent. The very features that made these mountains challenging, limited access, natural barriers to travel, extreme weather conditions, created the perfect environment for preserving ancient beliefs and practices. The Blackburn case is unlikely to be unique. Similar disappearances have been documented throughout the Appalachian region dating back to the early 19th century. What distinguishes this case is simply that it came to light. The sisters' practices exposed through a combination of unusual circumstances and persistent investigation. One wonders how many similar operations continue undetected, with isolated communities accepting periodic disappearances as the natural price of maintaining certain traditions. The Blackburn case remains officially unsolved. The property was never redeveloped, and the area was later absorbed into the Panther State Forest. No marker indicates the location of the former homestead, though local guides occasionally point out what they claim is the overgrown foundation to curious hikers. The final documented connection to the case comes from a 1967 interview with Elias Hardwick, who served as an assistant to the county coroner in 1915. At the age of 93, shortly before his death, he told a researcher from the West Virginia State Police Historical Division, "I'll tell you what was never put in any official report. When we examined those remains found behind the Blackburn place, the coroner noticed something odd about the condition of certain parts. He told me privately that the organs, particularly livers, hearts, and certain glandular tissues, had been removed with remarkable precision. Not like a butcher would do, but almost surgical. And another thing, we found that some remains showed evidence of having been preserved in salt and herbs before being processed further." The coroner said whoever did this wasn't just killing for killing's sake. There was purpose, method. He said it reminded him of old embalming techniques, except these weren't meant to preserve. They were meant to prepare. I asked him, "Prepare for what?" He just shook his head and said, "For consumption, son. Ritual consumption." But here's what haunts me still. We found personal effects with some of the remains, watches, rings, items that could have identified the victims. These weren't hidden or destroyed. They were arranged in what appeared to be deliberate patterns around the remains. The coroner said it looked like offerings, like the items were placed there as part of whatever ritual they were conducting. And another thing, we found a journal page among the remains. Most of it was too damaged to read, but one passage was clear. It said, "The feast is not simply consumption of flesh. It is the transference of essence from the departed to the living. Those who eat unknowingly become vessels carrying forward what would otherwise be lost to the void. We are not ending lives. We are preserving them in new forms." The coroner burned that page himself, said some things were better not included in official records. In the century since these events, the story of the Blackburn sisters has faded from public memory, surviving primarily as a cautionary tale told by locals to discourage exploration of abandoned properties in the deep hollows of McDowell County. Occasional rumors surface of peculiar Sunday gatherings in remote communities, of special meals prepared for the grieving, of sisters seen at dusk purchasing unusual herbs at country markets. The mountains keep their secrets well. Even today, some local families in the most isolated regions of Appalachia maintain strict traditions about Sunday meals, who can be invited, what prayers must be said before eating, and which parts of the meal must be consumed completely, without question. A particularly disturbing account emerged in 1972, when a folklore researcher from West Virginia University interviewed an elderly woman in a remote community in Wyoming County. The woman, identified only as Mrs. G. in the researcher's notes, described a tradition she called taking in the departed that had been practiced in her family for generations. When someone passes, there's a proper way to keep them with you. The modern way with funerals and tombstones, that's for show. The real remembrance happens at the table. There are women in these hills who know the old ways, how to prepare a meal that brings the departed back into the family circle. Not as a ghost, mind you. Something more real than that? The essence goes into the meal, and then into those who love them most. They become part of you, speaking through your voice sometimes, seeing through your eyes. My grandmother taught me the preparations, though I've never had cause to use them. The gathering needs to happen on a Sunday, when the veil is thinnest. Those who come to eat don't need to know what they're receiving. In fact, it's better if they don't. The knowledge would block the transfer. The preparer, though, she must know. She must make the sacrifices needed to open the pathway. When the researcher pressed for details about these preparations and sacrifices, the woman reportedly became evasive, saying only that some traditions aren't meant for university books, and that those with need will find their way to the knowledge. The researcher noted that the woman had numerous old cookbooks in her kitchen, one of which appeared to have a handwritten inscription on the cover that included the name Blackburn, though she was not allowed to examine it closely. The coal mining operations that once dominated McDowell County have largely ceased. The population has dwindled and many homes stand empty. Occasionally, smoke can be seen rising from chimneys of remote cabins where no official residents are recorded. Local mail carriers report sporadic invitations left in mailboxes along rural routes, handwritten notes inviting recipients to Sunday dinner, promising a meal that will reconnect you with all you have lost. These invitations are invariably signed simply, "The Sisters." A postal worker interviewed anonymously for a 1988 article in a regional folklore journal described finding such invitations while covering routes in the most remote areas of McDowell and Wyoming counties. They always appear after someone in the area has lost a family member. The invitations are on old-fashioned paper, handwritten in faded ink. The addresses are always correct, but there's never a return address. I asked an old-timer on my route about them once. He got real quiet, then told me, "Some invitations aren't meant to be delivered by the postal service." He took the letter from me and burned it right there, said he was doing me a favor, said the sisters have been sending those invitations for generations, and that some hunger never dies. The mystery of what actually transpired at the Blackburn homestead in those years remains unsolved. Were the sisters practicing some ancient ritual brought from the old world? Were they merely deranged killers exploiting the grief of their neighbors? Or is there something about the isolation of those ancient mountains that cultivates beliefs and practices beyond our understanding? County health records from 1914-1915 show no reported illnesses among local residents that could be attributed to contaminated food. However, the same records indicate an unusual number of melancholic conditions and nervous exhaustion cases in the months following the sisters' disappearance, particularly among those who were known to have attended their gatherings. Dr. Wellington Hargrove's journal contains a puzzling entry from March 1915. Treated Josephine Cartwright today for persistent insomnia and digestive disturbances. Patient reports recurring dreams of deceased husband speaking to her from inside. Recommended laudanum tincture for sleep. Patient mentioned attending Blackburn dinner in autumn. Possible connection to current psychological state. Similar symptoms observed in Harrison Montgomery, Agatha Pendleton, and 3 others known to have attended Blackburn gatherings. All report sensation of presence within their bodies. Montgomery claims to hear wife's voice using my own mouth while asleep. Most disturbing case is Augustus Wheeler, who attended multiple gatherings and now exhibits dramatic personality shifts. Wife reports he sometimes speaks in voices and mannerisms of deceased community members, seems unaware of episodes afterward. Consulted alienist in Charleston regarding possible hysteria diagnosis. Alienist suggested possibility of physical contaminant in food causing hallucinations. Chemical analysis impossible without samples. Alternative explanation too disturbing to consider. The land where the Blackburn property once stood has remained undeveloped. In 1962, a surveying team for the U.S. Forest Service reported unusually poor growth in the clearing behind where the house had been located. Soil samples revealed abnormally high levels of calcium, phosphorus, and iron, consistent with what might be found if large amounts of bone and blood had decomposed there. The area was marked in forestry records as unsuitable for recreational development due to unstable ground conditions. A subsequent geological survey in 1978 noted another anomaly, a complete absence of wildlife in the immediate vicinity of the former clearing. The report states, no evidence of small mammals, birds, or even insects observed within approximately 200-yard radius of site. Vegetation sparse and stunted where it grows at all. Local guide refused to enter clearing, claimed area was hungry ground that local hunters and trappers have avoided for generations. Soil samples reveal no obvious contaminants that would explain absence of wildlife. Temperature readings within clearing consistently 3 to 5 degrees lower than surrounding forest, regardless of time of day or weather conditions. As recently as 1966, a hunter from outside the region claimed to have encountered 2 elderly women deep in the forest near the former Blackburn property. According to his account, given to the park ranger, but never formally recorded, the women invited him to join them for a Sunday meal, promising it would ease the pain of his recent loss, though he had not mentioned to them that his brother had died 6 months earlier. The hunter declined and left the area immediately. When rangers investigated the location he described, they found only a cold fire pit and animal bones. The species could not be definitively identified. The hunter, Nathaniel Kincaid from Ohio, provided additional details in a letter to the Park Service in 1967. The women looked to be in their 70s, though it was hard to tell in the forest light. They were dressed oddly, not modern clothing, but long dresses like from another era. The older one did most of the talking, while the younger one watched me in a way that made my skin crawl. They knew things about my brother they couldn't possibly have known, specific details about how he died, personal matters. They said they had a special way of reuniting people with their lost loved ones. Said I could carry him with me always after their Sunday dinner. When I declined, the older woman smiled and said, "The invitation remains open. Grief doesn't fade, and neither does hunger." I've never felt more relieved than when I made it back to my truck. I won't be hunting in those mountains again. Those who study the darker chapters of Appalachian history point to the Blackburn case as an example of how isolated communities sometimes develop practices that serve psychological needs through means considered taboo by mainstream society. The sisters' apparent belief that consuming specially prepared human flesh could reconnect the bereaved with their departed loved ones represents an extreme manifestation of what anthropologists call incorporation rituals, symbolic or literal consumption meant to integrate the essence of something external. The power of such beliefs should not be underestimated. Several of the confirmed attendees of the Blackburn Sisters gatherings later reported sensations of presence or visitation from their deceased family members. Whether these experiences resulted from suggestion, some unknown property of the meals consumed, or genuine supernatural occurrence remains a matter of speculation. Dr. Margaret Holloway, professor of cultural anthropology at Marshall University, published a paper in 1982 titled "Ritualistic Cannibalism as Grief Response in Isolated Communities," which examines the psychological foundations that might underlie practices like those attributed to the Blackburn Sisters. The concept of incorporation, taking the dead inside oneself, exists metaphorically in many mainstream traditions. We keep their memory alive or carry them in our hearts. What the Blackburn case suggests is a literalization of this metaphor in a community where conventional religious consolations were either unavailable or insufficient. The mountains create both physical and psychological isolation. When standard grief practices fail to provide comfort, alternative approaches emerge. The effectiveness of such rituals cannot be measured solely by modern, rational standards. If participants believed they were reconnecting with their deceased loved ones, experiencing actual communication and presence, then the ritual succeeded in its psychological purpose, regardless of the objective reality. The testimonies of those who attended the Blackburn gatherings consistently describe a sense of comfort and connection following the meals. That this comfort came at the expense of unwitting victims represents the moral horror of the practice, but doesn't negate its psychological efficacy for the bereaved. What makes such cases particularly disturbing to modern sensibilities is not just the taboo of cannibalism, but the implication that our conventional methods of processing grief might be, for some individuals, fundamentally inadequate. The Blackburn sisters offered something more concrete than memories or faith. They claimed to provide actual reconnection, a bridging of the gap between life and death through the most primal act of consumption. Perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that the sisters were not unique. Throughout the Appalachian region, stories persist of special meals prepared for the grieving, of old women who know recipes to bring back what was lost, of certain foods that must never be questioned. These narratives share common elements: Sunday gatherings, the involvement of women who have themselves experienced profound loss, and the promise of reconnection with the deceased. A former sheriff from Buchanan County, Virginia, provided an anonymous account to a folklore researcher in 1991 describing an investigation from the early 1970s. "We had 3 hikers go missing in the national forest, and the last place they were seen was asking directions to a certain hollow where they'd heard there was an interesting local tradition, some kind of special Sunday dinner. We never found them, but during the search, we came across this cabin way back in the woods. 2 sisters lived there, had to be in their 80s. Place was immaculate, which struck me as odd for such an isolated location. They were real hospitable, offered us food and drink, which we declined. My deputy noticed their smokehouse seemed unusually large for just 2 elderly women, but we had no cause to search it. As we were leaving, one of them invited us to come back for Sunday dinner, said it would be specially prepared. Something in the way she said it made my hair stand on end. I made a note to come back with a warrant, but when we returned 3 days later, the cabin was empty. Looked like it had been abandoned for years. Dust everywhere, though I know damn well it had been spotless just days before. The strangest thing? My deputy and I both remembered the details differently. He recalled 3 sisters, not 2. I remembered the cabin being blue. He insisted it was unpainted wood. Only thing we agreed on was that overwhelming sense of dread when they mentioned Sunday dinner. I've responded to murders, suicides, all manner of ugliness in my career, but nothing ever felt as wrong as that invitation. In the words of Dr. Livingston's unpublished conclusion, the hunger for connection with those we have lost transcends conventional morality. In isolated communities where orthodox religious consolation is inconsistent or inaccessible, alternative practices emerge. The Blackburn case represents not merely an aberration, but a window into how desperation and isolation can transform ancient beliefs into terrible actions. The sisters likely viewed themselves not as murderers, but as priestesses of a sacred tradition, offering a form of comfort unavailable through conventional means. That their comfort required the taking of lives illustrates how isolation can warp perspective until the unthinkable becomes necessary. The final recorded reference to the Blackburn sisters appears in a 1968 nursing home admission document from Johnson City, Tennessee. A patient identified as Cordelia B. was admitted with advanced dementia. The intake notes describe her as elderly female, repeating phrases about Sunday preparations and feeding the mourners, occasionally becoming agitated and claiming, "Minerva will return with ingredients." The patient died 3 weeks later of natural causes. No next of kin claimed the body, which was buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery. A nurse who attended the patient during her final days later reported that the woman would often speak lucidly about events from decades earlier. In a statement given to a local historical society in 1972, the nurse recalled she would talk about these Sunday gatherings like they were normal family dinners. She described the preparation in detail, the specific ways certain meats had to be cut, the spices that had to be used, the prayers that had to be said over the cooking pots. Sometimes she'd stop mid-sentence and ask me if I'd lost anyone close to me. When I told her my husband had passed the year before, she took my hand and said, "We could bring him back to you, you know. Not as he was, but inside you. You could carry his voice in your mind always." Then she'd ask if I would help her prepare for Sunday. It was deeply unsettling, especially when she'd slip and say things that made it clear she wasn't talking about pork or beef. The night before she died, she was more alert than usual. She looked right at me and said, "We never killed anyone who wasn't already broken by loss. We gave them purpose. We made them vessels. The meat is just the medium. It's the essence that matters." She died in her sleep that night. I've never told anyone else what she said. Some things you just don't repeat. Today, hikers in certain remote areas of McDowell County occasionally report smelling cooking fires on Sunday evenings, though no registered campsites exist in these locations. Park rangers have investigated, but found nothing beyond cold ash. Local residents avoid these areas, particularly as dusk approaches. A researcher from the West Virginia Folklore Project conducted interviews in the region in 2005, collecting local legends and superstitions. One recurring theme among elderly residents was the warning never to accept dinner invitations from strangers in the deep hollows, particularly on Sundays. When pressed for the reason behind this superstition, most would only say, "Some hungers never die," or "Some feasts are never for the guests." One elderly man, speaking on condition of anonymity, offered a more detailed explanation. Those mountains have their own laws. There are families back in those hollows that go back generations, keeping to the old ways. They don't mean harm, not really. They just believe different than town folk about how to handle grief and loss. They think the dead can stay with us if we take them in properly. The sisters weren't the first and weren't the last to prepare those special Sunday meals. The practice continues, passed down mother to daughter in certain families. They see themselves as doing good, bringing comfort to those suffering loss. That the comfort requires sacrifice doesn't trouble them. It's just the way of things in the deep hollows. The mountains demand their due. The hunger for connection with those we've lost can drive us to extremes. In the deepest hollows of Appalachia, where the mountains fold in upon themselves and sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor, old beliefs persist. There are still homes where an extra place is set at Sunday dinner for those who have passed on. There are still recipes handed down through generations with ingredients listed only as the special preparation, and there are still isolated cabins where smoke rises from chimneys on Sunday afternoons, carrying with it aromas both enticing and unidentifiable. If you find yourself on a backcountry road in those ancient mountains and come upon two women who invite you to Sunday dinner, consider carefully before accepting. Ask yourself what you've lost recently and whether you're truly prepared to be reconnected with it. The sisters may be gone, but their traditions may linger, passed down through generations who understand that some hungers are never fully satisfied. In the words attributed to Minerva Blackburn in her sister's recovered journal, we all consume the essence of others throughout our lives, their ideas, their emotions, their influence. We are merely making literal what has always been metaphorical. The feast is communion in its purest form. Those who join our table leave carrying pieces of the departed within them. Is there any more perfect memorial? The mountains keep their secrets. The invitation remains open. Sunday dinner is served.